All right. Good morning, everyone. How's it going? Welcome to the AWS Cloud Tech Talks. I'm Will McDonald. I'm Principal Product Manager of Thinkbox. And I'm super excited to talk to everyone today about Studio in the Cloud. You are here at 10 a.m. on the Wednesday of SIGGRAPH. Everyone hanging in there? Good? It's okay. We'll get through it together. It'll be fine. Well, so figured I'd start with a little bit of background on Thinkbox for those who aren't familiar. So Thinkbox was founded, or actually originated from Frantic Films as a collection of internal technology tested in production, and eventually spun out of Frantic Films and became Thinkbox Software, founded by Chris Bond in 2010. Eventually that led to an acquisition by AWS, and here we sit, rebranded as AWS Thinkbox. Clever, I know, but So yeah, it's been a long journey for Thinkbox. Obviously, we've benefited from the idea that a lot of the technology was tested heavily in real-world production. So we've continued to iterate on it as we go. But today I want to talk a little bit about Studio in the Cloud, because you may know Thinkbox as a collection of products, be it Deadline, be it Krakatoa, Stoke, and of course we support all those products and remain super excited about it. But I think one of the things we found is that beyond render management, beyond particle simulation, and as it relates to AWS, we found that there's a tremendous opportunity to move customers more to the cloud through time, either in a hybrid environment or all in on AWS. And we'll go through a few customer examples of that. So what does Studio in the Cloud mean? Rendering, time-old favorite. It means infrastructure and software. And then it means virtual workstations. So we'll kind of step through each of these together, go through some of the exciting things we've seen from customers in each, go through some of our new offerings that we have within AWS, and then most importantly, how people have been able to effectively tie all of this together into something really compelling that actually works in production. So let's start with rendering first. So revisiting kind of this insight we had starting last year, one of the things we noticed in rendering patterns, and this comes from a large studio, this is real-world data, and you can think of the x-axis as the render submissions over time, over the course of the day, and then you can think of the y-axis as the amount of render time. And you can see that there are certain peaks with rendering where it's hitting almost 48 hours of wait time. And when you deal with that kind of wait time, that means artists are generally not able to work effectively. They're waiting for their work to come back. Directors and producers are waiting for the work. They can't hold the dailies to review the work. So everyone's just kind of sitting around and hopefully doing work in parallel, although that's not always the case. So the coffee area gets quite busy when this happens. And then you can kind of see anyone that's been involved in productions before, towards the end of a production, you can see these kind of buckets where more and more wait time starts to accumulate over the time. So our assumption was always that we'd be able to move a lot of these peaks over to the cloud. People don't want to rent or buy out additional render nodes for a short period of time. So we thought this made the most sense. And it turns out that that actually wasn't the case in what we saw with customers. What they did instead is they said, hey, I have access to all this new capacity on the cloud. So instead of just taking some of the overrun compute that they needed and moving that to the cloud, instead they multiplied the amount of iterations that they were able to complete, and they spread out their work across more and more capacity. So they went from waiting from 48 hours all the way down to a couple hours in this case, and they did that by being able to split up submissions across more machines. So you'll see in the graph above, that's the number of workers, number of render nodes that are spun up at any given time. So you can kind of see peaks that go all the way up to 1,600. And then the lower graph represents the amount of time it takes for each submission to complete. So going from 48 hours to 2 hours is quite compelling, as you might imagine. And what it allows people to do is, one, of course, get work back faster. But in addition, it also allows them to pump out more iterations. So they have more creative control. They're able to take more reviews, take more notes, pump out additional iterations, and hopefully, well, ideally, pump the quality bar up. So that's one of the trends that we had been seeing. We saw that starting last year, and that's remained true. And again, like the the idea around this is that it's really the time that becomes elastic at this point. If you need work done faster, you simply spread it out across more capacity and you can get it back faster. And we've seen really interesting cases of this. Our friends at MilkFX, who I won't steal all their thunder because they're going to be presenting later today, they worked on Good Omens, which is an Amazon Prime Video production, so please check it out. They had 5 months to deliver 650 shots, so a relatively small team working on what amounted to be a pretty large production. So the nice thing about being able to extend their capacity in this way is it allows them to take on more work, so they're able to take on other projects in parallel to this one. And the nice thing about this is it really allows customers to punch above their weight and really operate like a major studio that's made massive render farm investments. So really exciting to see, and more to come from them later today. We also have an example from our friends Fuse FX working on the Orville series on Fox. Really high production quality. You know, they were challenged with being able to produce content that really rivals major film production, right? 220 shots over 1,000 man hours in 8 weeks, so super condensed, really tight work schedule. And you know, the ability to be able to peak capacity through deadline allowed them to actually get this work done at a really high quality bar. And on that note, they've been nice enough to allow us to show some of their recent work that they've been doing, so I'll run through that. Awesome. I'm a sucker for the green fire. I think that's so cool. So this is an example of kind of a hybrid architecture. So FuseFX is an example of this. Not down to the letter. They have a slightly different architecture, but it is a good high-level example of what we're dealing with. You know, most customers have on-prem resources that they use every day, investments they've made in on-prem resources. So we wanted to build a system that allowed customers to be able to leverage those investments that they've already made, but also be able to extend out to AWS. So this represents a hybrid architecture using Deadline and the traditional render nodes. We have our standard database and repository that keeps track of all the files. But the magic comes where you're actually able to leverage AWS in the exact same way you would your on-prem resources. So it's all opaque to the user. They can treat these resources just as they would the local prem worker nodes. And we'll dive into a little bit around some of the details around this architecture coming up. One thing I'd call out, and a lot of people still aren't aware of this, is most of the rendering that we see on AWS, it leverages EC2 Spot. So EC2 Spot is our essentially spare capacity on EC2. And I'll kind of walk through some of the differences of the EC2 offerings that we have. So the first is on-demand. This is the one that people are most familiar with. You pay by the second. You can launch any kind of instance that you want. It's there when you need it. Great for spiky workloads, and you know, has some differences between Spot that we'll get to for a second. Reserved instances. This is essentially, in some ways, a rental model. You know, you make a upfront commitment between 1 to 3 years. You get a dedicated set of machines. Use those machines as you will. We'll talk a little bit about some of the use cases for RIs as it relates to visual effects and content production overall. But you can think of this as committed steady state use. So license servers, databases, things that you just never can have go down for any purpose, and you know that are essentially going to run, you know, near 24/7. And then finally, we have Spot. So again, Spot is our spare capacity, great again for spiky workloads, things that can be fault tolerant, flexible. So rendering's a really great fit for Spot. And a few of the simple rules for Spot that we really recommend people to follow. And one thing to make clear, Spot is the exact same compute that you use for on-demand. Same availability zone, same region availability, same instance types, geo footprint, et cetera. It's all the same. The only difference with Spot is that at any given time, the Spot instance can be taken away from you. So you're given a 2-minute warning, and then the Spot instance is taken back. So you can imagine a case where someone in that region is launching thousands and thousands of on-demand instances and it needs more capacity. That would be a time where potentially you would see interruption. But people use Spot really effectively all the time, and we've seen cases with folks using Spot where they're able to spin up to 1 million parallel vCPU clusters at the same time. So you can really scale super high using Spot. And so usually the most frequent question that we have is, okay, how often am I going to get interrupted? How often am I going to have to, either restart from zero, or how often, or how important is checkpointing in our workflow? We did a bit of a study over the last 3 months. 95% of the Spot instance interruptions that we've seen had to do with instances actually completing their work and users actually shutting it down themselves. Essentially meaning that the rendering was completed successfully and the user shut it down. So really only that 5% represented real interruptions, and there are tons of strategies involved with how you can handle that gracefully. Checkpointing is of course the most obvious one on the rendering side. So an example of a customer that used Spot at a pretty high level was our customer Tangent Animation. They worked on Next Gen, which was released last year on Netflix, full-length animated film using all Blender, which was really interesting. They used AWS to scale up to 3,000 concurrent instances, so pretty high. It ended up being pretty successful for them with limited interruptions, right? And a lot of that had to do with the idea of the capacity that AWS is able to bring to bear is pretty substantial. And we have a lot of strategies around, how you diversify your fleets, your Spot fleets, to have the right mix of diversification on the instances that you're using, so you're actually going to be able to get that capacity. So in their case, it worked tremendously well. And again, they used Deadline as their render management solution and went from there. So a really great project. Also, our friends Rocket Science VFX, again, I'll constrain myself from stealing too much of their thunder because they're going to be presenting later today as well. This is a really interesting case. They use Spot, again, but the key difference here is they actually use GPUs instead of CPUs. And they were actually able to get the capacity that they needed on GPUs on Spot. So there's all Redshift for the most part. The other interesting thing about this is because they're able to expand in this way in the cloud, it allowed them to take on another project which was CPU-based. And again, they used Deadline and Spot for that as well. So they're able to set up a pipeline that enabled both, and again, allowed them to take on multiple projects at the same time. In the CPU's case, ended up being Arnold, which of course we support as well. Cool, so I wanted to get a little bit into infrastructure and software. And the reason why these two things are important, particularly as they pertain to the studio in the cloud, is a lot of people think of AWS in the visual effects and animation industry as just raw compute, but it goes well beyond that, particularly when you start thinking about how you're moving other important pieces of your pipeline to the cloud. And so most importantly is just the ecosystem that we're able to support. I don't know of any studio that I've ever met that is just using 1 or 2 tools or 1 or 2 plugins. It's a wide array. It's a huge ecosystem that people operate in. So we've been able to partner, with the primary heavy hitters in the industry, the Mayas, Clarices, V-Ray, Arnold, et cetera. And one of the things that we offer on the rendering side is usage-based licensing. And you can think of it this way. If I wanted to extend my render capacity, say I have a 500 node farm right now, I want to extend that to 3,000. Each one of those nodes needs a corresponding license as well. Well, I don't really want to go and purchase an additional 3,000 licenses just to use for a couple of days, potentially. So what we provide is usage-based licensing, where we charge you at shorter intervals by the minute. And that way you can actually only be charged for what you use. And what's really nice about that is it fits the same paradigm as you're consuming compute. You're only paying for the compute that you consume. Why not licensing? So we've applied that same principle for licensing as well. And it just allows you to avoid the risk of having to purchase a ton of licenses. At the same time, a lot of customers also actually have those licenses to bear, particularly large studios. We either have special deals with the ISVs, or they just happen to purchase a ton of licenses. We support a bring your own license model as well. So you can use all the licenses that you already have on AWS. So you don't only have to use UBL on AWS. You can actually use a blend or one or the other. It's really your pick to maximize the investment in what you're doing. Moving over to, we talked a little bit about software. Another important piece to this is just the different partners that we support as well as it relates to rendering and outward. So Deadline, we have our own solution on how we handle storage and file systems. So that's built in, primarily using a S3 and EBS synchronization type system. But we've seen a lot of customers use our partner solutions really effectively as well. Namely Qumulo and Weka. We'll dive into each here in a bit. But yeah, and these don't represent our only partners. We have Pixit as well, or Pixit Media do a fantastic job as well. And at AWS, we're really all about choice in the end. We recognize that customers, a lot in the media and entertainment industry, love Qumulo and have a great success with them. We want to be able to support these partners so that customers can continue to use that if that's what their pipeline leverage is. Same with Weka, same with all our other partners. So let's dive into the infrastructure a little bit more. And this will kind of contextualize where the importance of the file system and storage typically sits. So I talked a little bit about how Deadline out of the box handles a lot of the data syncing between what you have on-prem and upward to S3, and eventually hydrates EBS volumes, which then hydrate the render nodes to actually get the work done. One of the nice things about Deadline that we handle is we understand what files to actually push up to the cloud at any given time. So it's actually walking in the dependency of what you need on-prem and only pushing that data up. So you're not having to push your entire set of files that you have on-prem, which could be terabytes and terabytes of data. We understand what needs to be pushed and only push that. And where people generally are starting to look to swap out in this diagram is really the EBS volume side. And this is where solutions like Qumulo and Weka come in handy because they're able to handle a higher amount of parallel instances at the same time due to the high performance that they have at the file system level. And we'll talk a little bit about examples of each. And there's a little diagram of our friends at Weka.io. So they're a high performance HPC file system solution. Has been really great in terms of just being able to elastically scale out file systems. So you can imagine the idea that I'm a customer using the cloud today. I'm running, say, 300, 400 parallel instances at the same time, and now all of a sudden I need to scale out to 3,000, 4,000 at the same time. This allows you to kind of elastically scale your cluster easily while still maintaining relatively linear performance. That's really important, and the reason why is that usually it's difficult, I think, as many of us know, forecasting out how much rendering you need throughout a production. You're either usually hitting the red button that you need something immediately or otherwise, but it's traditionally very hard to forecast this. So being able to elastically expand at a moment's notice ends up being a pretty big deal. So Weka handles that quite well. Also Qumulo, again, Qumulo is super popular in the media and entertainment industry. A really great hybrid option. Obviously, they have an on-prem component, but they've done a great job integrating with AWS to allow for S3 syncing and hydrating from the on-prem side and being able to hook into our render nodes. So both of these partners are at our booth. Definitely check them out. And yeah, they've worked out great for a multitude of customers across all sizes. And of course, we continue to build at AWS. We have a lot of solutions that we're pushing out every day. I don't think we're short on services at this point. We have quite a few. One of the things that we recently announced is FSx for Lustre. So this is our own fully managed file system for compute-intense workloads. We've been working on being able to help customers using Deadline or not using Deadline be able to leverage FSx as a managed file system solution. And of course, if we're supporting Linux, we might as well support Windows as well. So of course, we have an FSx solution for Windows as well. Swing by the booth for more information on these. But we're really excited about these two offerings and excited to see what customers are going to end up doing with them. Again, able to handle a lot of parallel instances all in one go. Having a fully managed solution is really helpful here rather than having to worry with some of the idiosyncrasies of having to set a lot of this up yourself. So on that note, I wanted to bring up on stage Mac Moore. Mac Moore is the president and CEO of Conductor Technology, and he actually represents a great example of a customer that has not only been able to leverage the EC2 compute resources, but has also been able to leverage a lot of our other infrastructure like FSx and et cetera. So Mac, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
I need a high five, by the way. There we go.
How's everybody doing? Nice to meet you. Like Will said, my name is Mac. I run a small company called Conductor. Interesting, this is the first, I think this is the first SIGGRAPH I've come to where I haven't had to explain why elastic compute better matches with elastic workflows. It seems like everybody's kind of bought into this thing, and now we're all just trying to figure out how we're going to go about it. So it's a nice change of pace. So, you're going to hear a lot of resonating themes with what I'm talking about against what Will was talking about. And it really has to do with how do we solve this problem? And I think when we look at specifically cloud rendering, which is where Conductor sits, and solving that discontinuity between the rendering need and on-premise capacity or workloads, et cetera, rendering was sort of that first obvious choice for going cloud because the promise of cloud was instant access, instant on. But how do you match that? But it was also what turned out to be, quite the hardest problem, which is, people have kind of come from this environment where I'm going to forecast from an IT standpoint. I'm going to look at how many nodes that I have. What are my demands? What are my oncoming projects? Do I need to do something from an additional capital request standpoint? Can I afford to get into VFX if I can't afford this type of capital? Can I, those little lumps, you see artist workstations turning on when they go home for the night. How do I take this and essentially marry it to that demand? Well, traditionally, a lot of forecasting goes on here. And so the first 2 years of my life at Conductor after I came over from Autodesk was trying to marry these two, and a lot of times I'd go into studios and they'd be like, okay, well, this is how I solve it. I just peanut butter that stuff at the end and I shove it in the beginning and I just kind of lean on the artist to do that. Well, in all practicality, I think we all know that that's not how it happens and how it kind of manifests itself. Maybe the best intentions were you're going to do that and you forecasted out this project and all of a sudden you get berated by a director and all of a sudden you get a bunch of shot changes. Next thing you know, 2 or 3 projects are stacked on top of one another. And then you're cumulatively trying to figure this out. So why is this so important? I think we all can recognize in this industry that is a significant amount of the budget to solve this rendering problem. To get that last final pixel out the door, you're talking about 1/4 of your total production budget to get this stuff done. So it's an important piece. It moves the needle one way or another. When you're going out for bid, you want to make sure that you're lock solid on what that budget is going to be, because that could either make or break your profit margins, right? And we all know how razor thin those already are. So traditionally, people have been coming to this up until, I would say the last year. People have been coming at this looking at, okay, well, do I make another CapEx request for additional hardware? Do I go to some kind of leased alternative where I rent for a month or two? And it's very similar. I think the maturation of this market in general, and you can say this for all cloud, typically when I give talks, I kind of marry the analogy of the automotive industry to what we're seeing here in visual effects. You know, if you look at the automotive industry 30 years ago, how many people were leasing a car, right? That was almost frowned upon, like you couldn't afford that car if you had to lease the car, because, you know, you had to have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to get your perpetual model of the car. Well, software was very similar. So if we look at the software and the demand, now you flash forward a bit 10 years ago, now all of a sudden leasing picks up. Hey, I want a new car, I want a car in warranty, 3 years, maybe I want something new. A leased model starts scratching that itch pretty well. And now if you look at present day, now we have people, especially the younger community, that are questioning even the need to own an automobile. Well, I can just Uber when I need it, and you know, when I don't need the car, I don't have a big $30,000 investment depreciating value sitting in a garage or sitting in a parking space that I have to pay for. I pay $20 when I want to get over to Glendale, and when I want to come back to downtown, I'm back and I'm not paying anything else. That's what cloud is doing for visual effects, and starting to figure out how we do this and how we get what we need when we need it. So how does Conductor fit into this? You know, what's the difference between Conductor and AWS? I would see Conductor is really fitting the mold of on-ramping you to cloud resources. You know, there is in general, right, we're in the artistic world, we're not in the cloud world, and so what we're trying to do is solve a lot of the complexity of going to the cloud and make it very easy and approachable. So history of the company was similar to Thinkbox. Atomic Fiction was incepted in 2010, came up with this idea that there was this discontinuity between spending a bunch of money on building out a data center in your studio and the demand that you would have based on projects. Sometimes you need 100,000 cores, and then after that show delivers, you need 0 while you're, you know, working on some next bids. So they actually built it on the idea that cloud would be the elastic model that they would go to, started building some tech. The tech started working really well, and they spun out Conductor as its own entity in 2015. And so we launched into commercial availability in 2017, and we have done really well on-ramping folks to cloud, and on-ramping folks to cloud in a significant way, upwards of, you know, hundreds of thousands of cores per studio. And so a lot of what Will said speaks to what we do as well. We have permanent license agreements so that you don't have to worry about your entitlements and what you have and what you don't, and how am I going to manifest all of that model. I just want to hit the button and I want to go, and if I need 1,000 mile licenses for 30 minutes, I get 1,000 mile licenses for 30 minutes, and I know sort of the cost incurred for that, and you simply, you know, you pay for the experience, not necessarily I pay a little bit of this and a little bit for the cloud and a little bit for that. So lots of experience on the platform in terms of final films, episodics, VR, automotive, medical applications, all on the platform. Well in excess of over 250 million core hours is kind of how we measure things in core hours. Total volume of work on the platform, and lots of nice names, but a lot of stuff falling beyond those names as well. And so reason I'm up here is we are actually expanding beyond our existing cloud infrastructure into AWS this year. Will and I have just partnered as of about a month ago. And so we are essentially pushing into AWS, and what we are trying to do, just like Will was saying, the thing that really resonates in the rendering side is driving that elasticity, but driving the economics of that elasticity. So it is my job on your behalf to go off and proactively sniff for spot instance availability, get you that spot instance availability, and get you that rendered shot in the most economical way possible. Okay, so we've been working a lot since 2015. I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing, how I've seen kind of cloud being adopted. And then we'll walk into kind of where we're going beyond. So from 2015 to now, we've really been focused on operational excellence around extending the farm. That means integration to DCCs, some of the major providers that Will talked about, Autodesk, the Foundry, Clarice, all the major renderers as well, including Pixar. Integration into those DCCs, so you hit a button, we scrape the project, figure out if you have Alembic caches, textures, are you using Yeti for caches? We pull all of those dependencies in. You don't worry about what goes up into S3 and what gets spun up or how it gets spun up. You're simply hitting the, I need these, in this case, 40 frames to be rendered. We do it and we associate a 1-to-1 ratio between the number of VMs versus the number of frames. So if you have a 1,000 frame shot and you hit the go button, we're going to spin up 1,000 nodes on EC2 or Spot on your behalf. Okay? All about scale, all about efficiency of scale. I'm going to talk a little bit in the next slide about these pointy elements and why those pointy elements matter. And I'll give you a little calculus analogy, not to scare you too much. So you see, just like that production workflow and the need for that production demand, you see this laying out in this usage chart of one of our customers, driving up to, in this case, I think in excess of 100 and some odd thousand cores simultaneously, and you see the cost going up, but the cost is also recouped when you're going back down to zero. Promise of the cloud, right? Fulfilled. Another thing that we have built our business model around is not only giving you that elastic compute, but making sure that you're knowledgeable in managing the cost associated with that. If you've put a bid out there that says you're going to get this shot done for $5,000, you want to make sure that you're getting notifications, you're in control of what's running in the cloud versus that budget. So we've built some cost limits mechanisms within there to allow you to say, hey, when I get to $4,000, I want you to send me an email. When I get to $4,500, I want you to pause any pending work that's about to spin up EC2 or Spot. And then once you hit that 5,000, I want you to kill everything, and I want to go back to my producer, and we need to have a conversation with the production company to see if we can get more budget or where we are with shot quality. We'll talk a bit about how I see that manifesting in a bit as well. So it's really about I think what I'm seeing, and it's great to kind of hear that things are maturing in this way. If you had this conversation with studios maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, people were kind of coming out the cloud from an IT standpoint, right? They'd look at their forecast. They know they had 2,000 nodes on-prem. They know they were working those efficiently. They were running out of capacity. And then they were going to cloud, but they were going to cloud almost as if they were extending those node requirements, right? I'm gonna light up 200 more nodes, and I'm just going to leave them running for 3 months while I finish up my project. That's great, and you can do that, but that's not sort of using the cloud to the best of its ability. And so really, what we are focused on and what we feel like AWS really gives us the ability to do, even more so than we have in the past, is really work on the spikiness of these workflows, right? So if you think back to calculus and you're doing your integrals and you're looking at area under the curve, that area under the curve in this case is cost, right? So the more you light up things prematurely, I've done a talk in the past where I've kind of put this analogy in, like, would you feed money into a parking meter before you parked your car in the space? Absolutely not. Well, that's what people do in some cases, or have done historically in the cloud, is I'm going to light these things up so that my artists can render at some point on those VMs. Well, you want some just-in-time access to those. You want those things spinning up in a cost-efficient manner. You want to run those renders, and then you want to shut those things down. And so we pride ourselves on how we do that. And so some of the technology that AWS affords us, FSx for Lustre, like Will was referring to before, utilizing Amazon Batch in concert with that file serving mechanism, allows us to upload all of your data to fairly inexpensive S3, right? Have everything ready. Once everything is prepared for the render, spin up the FSx system such that now we have high performance file serving to go to those 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 nodes and do that in a very efficient way. And once that render is done, spin everything back down, back to S3 for you to download. Okay, so I've been alluding to some of this, like the maturation of the market. And I think it's always good to kind of talk to this with sort of fellow artists and studio leads of where your peers are going, what they've been doing. And this may be a small sample size as it's my customer base, but these are the conversations I've had for the last few years. So when we launched into commercial availability, SIGGRAPH of 2017, actually here in LA, lots of interest, lots of what is this, what is cloud. It was a lot of the what is cloud conversation and how does it pertain to my business. Lots of new accounts and a lot of new accounts with quick proof of concepts. And those proof of concepts may be one of those red button situations where, hey, I've been trying to finish this project for a week now with other providers or my on-prem, and I'm still sitting in the queue and the render wrangler won't increase the priority of my job. Is there a way you can do this? And so last minute jobs, all of a sudden, we do some peak shaving. It comes back very, very quickly and easily. And then those same customers and other people coming out of proof of concept suddenly come back to me in early 2018 going, okay, well, that was really easy. And that was really fast. And what we found was, just like Will was saying, it allowed us actually we ended up doing 2 more iterations of the same shot when we only thought we had 1 more shot at it. And so now all of a sudden you're chasing this, and Corbin's in the room. I'm going to steal Corbin's thing from SMPTE a couple years ago. They started chasing this last perfect pixel, right? And so, you have this shot and you're like, well, I just got a 150 frame shot back in 15 minutes and I could do a full review with the director and I could probably tweak that thing 3 or 4 more times, whereas on-prem, maybe I only had 1 more shot at it. So the quality bar starts being impacted. And so you start having these predetermined conversations around, well, how would I use this in a more foundational approach, maybe lowering the barrier of entry to when I make that decision to pivot from on-prem resources to cloud resources. And so now in 2019, we're really looking at a drastic reduction in what people want to do. If they have on-premise equipment, I mean, I've had probably a dozen conversations just yesterday about, hey, I have some depreciating assets, it's time for a refresh. I'm kind of thinking I may not even want to do a refresh, or how would I make a decision around how much to keep on-prem versus when I go? And so it's this whole cost of ownership, cost of going to the cloud conversation that really speaks to that technology adoption curve driving into, what I would consider sort of the early majority now, right? We're getting this shift of the community to go to this cloud-first approach. And so I think that's really where we're going as we start retiring some of this work that we've done and workflows that we have that are sort of on-prem heavy. We start looking at, and this is certainly good if you're wearing an Amazon shirt, right? How do we start looking at cloud-first approaches, right? Lots of conversations now with my existing customers and new customers saying, hey, I have all my stuff sitting in S3, or I plan to have everything sitting in S3. Could we do a read-write just straight from S3 into Conductor? You spin everything up, spin it back down, and dump it back into my S3 bucket. Could we do that? How would that work? So now it's not even POSIX file systems up, it's virtualized platforms. Last year, I took my company completely virtual. We had a brick and mortar facility in the Bay Area. I shut it down because I wanted to chase talent where the talent was, and I found I was hiring people in Boston and Seattle and out of the country in Montreal, and I think you guys are doing some very similar things. And I think the flexibility of the cloud, whether you're talking virtualization or render, I think speaks to a lot of that flexibility, right? We want to be able to chase the talent where the talent is, chase the credits where the credits are, and cloud allows or affords you the capability of doing that. Okay, so where am I going from now forward, and how am I leveraging some of the cloud assets? So really, 250 million core hours of data, and when I say data, I mean metadata. I don't have your data. What I have is information, histrionics about what you've run on the cloud, what the software stack was, how long it ran, did it get bumped if it was on spot, did it have to rerun, how long did it run, the file dependency size, all of that. And that rich data is allowing me, as you'll hear, throughout the show this week, you'll hear about machine learning and AI and how do we do data science around some of these things. And we're doing something very similar. So how do we take that and start not only orchestrating things and making an operationally excellent experience on the cloud, but how do we do it intelligently and make some of the decisions for you on your behalf that we feel like you need to make. Using probably the most interesting one of these is the one in the middle where I have a little car icon. going back to my car analogy again, not only is it interesting to have sort of a ride-sharing experience, but what if I could tell you walking in before you've even gone to bid, what if I could tell you how much it would cost for you to get across town, at a surge, at a surge rate, or get you across town at a certain time of day? How much would it take, Conductor, for you to render this on a Friday afternoon? I have 350 shots. It's got Yeti caches, and it's a Maya Arnold workflow. I want to be able to make that decision. So we're diving into that. There's some interesting technology, again, feeding back to the Amazon partnership with products like SageMaker, where I can leverage this to do analytics against my data set and start making decisions on your behalf. So can I start doing predictive analysis against what I've known? If you run into quick nuke comp on a Thursday afternoon in this data center part of the world, what's my probability of success on that spot instance? Just some testimonials, and I'll turn it back over to Will. And I think a lot of this speaks to a lot of the examples he gave. It started with, wow, that was cheap, and wow, that was quick. But then it starts getting into this top-line revenue, increased opportunity, subjective conversation, which really starts making my job really interesting, right? Because I'm having different conversations with folks now. Now it's, I wouldn't have been able to take this job without Conductor or without some cloud computing capability. These guys, Yannick that gives the quote down at the bottom, they actually won an award. They're a Swedish-based agency that does this digital zoo bit where they actually have created these artifacts, and then when they put out a bid, they actually leverage their own IP to get the work. Like, oh, you want an orangutan in your commercial? We can do the work, and we'll give you the orangutan for free. So they do great work. So they picked up this pretty heavy shot for them. They're probably a 10-artist studio worldwide. But they were able to do this fantastic shot, win these awards, and they wouldn't have been able to do that without some bit of elastic capability in spinning up what they were able to spin up. We do bigger stuff too, right? We just did some of the work on the latest Hellboy. And again, I think it's about not only scale, but the simplicity of access to that scale is what we really pride ourselves on. And then when we get into this, that last bit that I want to kind of leave you with, which is, it lets you get that work done, but all of a sudden when you get that work done and you're not at the coffee maker anymore and you're back at your desk and you have frames to review, you think, well, I could probably get one more iteration on that. And so when Axis Animation was working on their trailer for Magic the Gathering, they did just that, really working on high quality shots and increasing that iteration. So that's all I have. With that, I'll turn it back over to Will. I thank you for your time. We actually have a booth. We have a pod in AWS that we're going to be at, I think, until 1:30 today. So swing by on the back side of the rendering pod. And then if we leave that by 1:30 and you're later in the afternoon, we actually have a booth over in 1003. All right. With that, I'll turn it back over to Will. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Mac. Appreciate it. And we're super excited about having Conductor as a closer partner of ours and excited to see what they're going to do in the future. Definitely go check out their booth. Go check them out at our booth as well. I think until 1:30 they've got a demo running. And go sit on their very comfy couches. They're very nice. Yes, good job. I wanted to dig into, and the last piece of this is the virtual workstation piece. It's something we're really excited about, and it kind of brings up the note that Mac brought up that I'm personally excited about, which is enabling worldwide talent. We've kind of lived in a world where studios are constrained with what artist resources they can actually bring inside their brick and mortar operations. But the fact is that great talent exists all over the world, and a lot of times you find yourself in a place where you need to quickly onboard artists quickly based on expanding scope, based on additional projects that come online, and a lot of times you're constrained to wherever you're getting the work done. Wouldn't it be nice if you had a way to onboard artists quickly, enter into your infrastructure that you're working on, and actually create work for you anywhere in the world? So this is kind of the promise that we've been chasing on the virtual workstation front. So when we talked with customers, we really wanted to understand what was going to make a great virtual workstation experience. So, they needed a not only just high-spec graphics workstation, but really that variety of different specs to accommodate everything from Photoshop and texture painting work to all the way to fluid simulation work that's heavier and needs higher specs. And this is really one of the advantages of virtual workstations is you're actually able to take advantage of a wider spectrum of machine types rather than being constrained to maybe whatever specific machines that you have on-prem. And you can easily change between them as needed. So if I'm working on a really heavy shot one day, great. I'm going to spin up an instance that has more horsepower and then spin that back down to a lower spec and save money that way if I'm not needing that kind of horsepower. So that's really the promise of virtual workstations. And it's incredible even, I think Mac was mentioning this, for rendering the same kind of holds true for virtual workstations as well, is that if you ask 2-3 years ago, we had folks that maybe were using Teradici and their own data centers, so the box had moved out from underneath the artists in a closet somewhere or across town. Moving over to today, we have more and more customers actually using AWS Cloud to spin up virtual workstations. It's incredible to see the kind of acceleration and interest in this, and I think the key is, and tenet of AWS is really listening to customers in terms of what they're looking for. So I kind of talked about the variance in specifications, supporting the major platforms, Linux and Windows, of course, having dual HD 2K monitors, color pixel accuracy, video audio sync. You have to have support for all of the important peripherals, so Wacom Cintiq support has to happen. Essentially, you've got to replicate what artists know in terms of look and feel of the experience and all the tools that they're used to using. They're not willing to sacrifice, nor should they. So we've really strived to make sure that we give an equivalent experience, and we're excited about making further development efforts to even enhance that experience moving forward. So to date, that's meant leveraging EC2 G3 instance types. So this is the instance type that leverages, has GPUs on board, which of course is critical, all based on NVIDIA Tesla M60s. We have a variety of sizes. One's referenced there as an example. You can even spin up multiple GPUs if you want, if you need that kind of horsepower, or using applications that can actually take advantage of multiple GPUs. That's key. Can support up to 4 monitors at a relatively high resolution. But of course, there might be something else after G3, and is of course G4, hooray. So if you go to our booth right now, the demo stations that you can kick the tires on are all running on G4s right now. We're not currently in general availability, but we have them set up in the booth and you can give them a try. We're really excited about this instance type. Obviously, you're going to get a lot more horsepower as a result. I think you're going to find that the instance sizes are a better fit overall in terms of satisfying visual effects and animation needs. We work closely with the G4 team to make sure that that happened. So I think we're going to get a lot more happier artists that have the choice that they want. Another thing I'm personally very excited about is having access to the RT cores as part of the new GPUs that we have. All the fancy, exciting stuff that our favorite render engines or game engines are showing off in terms of real-time ray tracing, these will have the RT cores to be able to accommodate that. So now all of a sudden we're starting to bring in game engines in terms of, and as part of the equation. And since we're able to establish the very same artist working experience that they're used to on-prem, they'll have access to the ability to develop anything between visual effects, animation, and game development as well. So here's a high-level view of kind of a simple virtual workstation setup. We partner very closely with Teradici, great partner for us. In this graph, we leverage their Zero clients, which is a smaller footprint hardware that can be used, but you can easily use thin clients as well. You can dust off an old laptop, whatever else, and easily spin up virtual workstations that way. You just need a way of being able to plug in a mouse and keyboard and have network access, and away you go. To limit latency, so latency is obviously a big consideration in virtual workstations. In this architecture, we recommend using a direct connect just to keep the latency as low as possible to whatever region you decide works best. You obviously want to pick the one closest to you because We haven't solved speed of light issues yet, so that's still a thing. And then we and hooks directly into G3 instances. And we have supporting software. We have Amazon machine images that you can spin up to leverage all of your favorite software. So it's surprisingly quick and easy to use. And I can talk a little bit about, as we think about a full end-to-end studio in the cloud option, going back to the EC2 options, you can kind of think of it this way. When we think about the reserved instances, again, this is where you make a commit and save money by doing so. You can piece together things like your database support, your license servers, things that are never going to go away, you don't want to ever go away. You can use RIs for that. You can use on-demand for spiky workloads that you never want interrupted under any circumstances. So workstations are a great example of that. Pretty sure the artists will be breaking out pitchforks if they get their machine taken away at any time. So on-demand is a great example of what you'd want to use for that. And then finally, Spot, as we mentioned, for rendering. So hopefully you can kind of see where you want to kind of line up your infrastructure across EC2. And then, of course, beyond that, leveraging other options like FSX and Direct Connect and all the bits and pieces become important as well. And we'll get into that in a moment. I think the most important thing and the biggest takeaway, hopefully I can have everyone leave with today is this is all available now. This is not vaporware. Like, you can go build this right now, and we have customers doing it right now. And we have a deluge of documentation, as we like to provide here at AWS. So this is ready to go. We've set up tutorials that go through this in excruciating detail. So I really encourage everyone to go build. And I think it's especially true with virtual workstations, because I think there's a lot of kind of FUD around leveraging virtual workstations and having to compromise on experience in terms of what you're going to get. My background when I started my career was as an artist, so I'm notoriously picky on this. And I can tell you, you really do have to try it. It really does work, and hopefully you'll find time to drop by our booth and give it a spin for yourself. It's kind of what opened my eyes originally. It's just taking the Wacom, actually drawing something, seeing that there's actually no lag. The Wacom really drove this home for me because of the pressure sensitivity. You can really feel any kind of latency and drag on this, and it just feels really smooth. So give it a try. We also try and make it as easy as possible for you to give it a try. We've developed quick starts and in partnership with Teradici. We make it as easy as possible for you to hit the go button and kick the tires. So definitely give it a try. And then I wanted to take a little bit of a moment to do a special customer spotlight on a customer named Untold Studios. So Untold is a relatively new studio based out of London, and they're the world's very first all-in on public cloud customer. So when they started their studio in London, they made a commitment to not buy any on-prem hardware in terms of compute. If you go to their machine room, it's empty. It's got a few switches, and I think they've got like a pink couch in there or something. But yeah, there are no render nodes. There are no workstations in a closet somewhere or under the artist's desk. It all operates on AWS. And I think the really exciting thing about this, and Mac touched on this a little bit, is because they're all in on the cloud, it means all of their data exists on the cloud. Because all of their data exists on the cloud, that means they can very easily hydrate their render work nodes on the cloud. There's no need to actually manage a hybrid solution where you're having to figure out, what files do I need to push up, licensing considerations between on-prem on the cloud. So it's a pretty exciting thing, and it's allowed them to spin up artists very quickly. So if they hire 20 artists tomorrow, they just log into the very same infrastructure and get to work. It's really pretty inspiring to see. So I thought I'd throw up a quick video with Sam Reed, who's their head of technology, to talk a little bit just about his experience.
We are a group of people who've come together in the industry, sort of born out of a desire to do something different, do something new, and a bit of a willingness to rewrite the rules. We're the first creative studio to be completely operating in the public cloud. We're doing everything on AWS. The render is there, the storage is there. There's no moving of anything, and that's what really changes the game, actually. When you're setting a studio up, you need to make a load of decisions. You need to decide how much storage you want, how much capacity do you want from that file system. You need to decide how much render you want. If we get a big job tomorrow, I can say, okay, well, it's time to scale our storage. We just add more nodes to our storage cluster, and away we go. The speed at which we can scale is just phenomenal, and that's all thanks to the cloud. What Thinkbox did was they built a test lab for us in London, and we tried to replicate the environment as best we possibly could, and actually it lifted the whole team. Just seeing this in reality and seeing what was possible. AWS has a great support network and a great support team. I would say they were as passionate about getting this thing off the ground as we were, and they've just been a tremendous help.
Cool. So yeah, it kind of just, again, speaks to this idea, at any given time, if they wanted to find talent anywhere across the world, that talent can work in the very same infrastructure that they use on site, because it can all be easily replicated across multiple regions and et cetera. So it's really exciting to see, and it just opens the door to being able to expand global talent. I thought I'd throw up just a quick reference architecture here. We're actually working on a series of white papers that go into this into excruciating detail for those that want it. But I think the exciting thing here, and really just to kind of visualize it in your head, again, in Untold's case and other customers that we're working with, is they really just have monitors, keyboards, mice, Wacom tablets, et cetera, a Zero client bolted to the back of the monitors that talks out through a direct connect, and then everything else lives on AWS. So it's really exciting to see. We're super privileged to be able to work with an innovative company like Untold, and we're already working with numerous other customers to get to a similar place. So super exciting. So that kind of wraps up the three pillars, as I would call them, really four, in terms of Studio in the cloud. I did want to make a little special side announcement. AWS has recently joined the Academy Software Foundation. I think you would be hard-pressed to find any studio in the world that is not using open source software in one form or the other. So at AWS, we find open source software critically important for the visual effects and animation industry. So we're excited to join the Academy Software Foundation, whose mission is to be able to really focus on the maintenance, the innovation, and the upkeep of really important open source libraries like OpenVDB, OpenImageIO, et cetera. So definitely check them out. And yeah, we're excited to be part of this. Open source is here to stay, and it's continuing to grow its footprint within our industry. So super important. And then quickly, I'll just kind of leap forward in the day. We've got a lot of great talks for you all to check out. We've got Milk Effects coming up, talking about creating apocalyptic visual effects for good omens. That's going to be a great one. We have the very handsome Rex holding a panel of a variety of customers. We've got Rocket Science coming up. We've got Chris Del Conte, also handsome, Chris, doing his own panel. And then to conclude the day, we have Nice Shoes doing a great presentation as well. So hopefully you'll stick around, and thanks everyone. Appreciate the time.